So I would encourage those who work for the district, take a second, if you haven't already, clear your calendars, make sure the folks that are back in your offices know that you are doing extremely important work right now. It becomes our priority. And although we do many important things over the course of the day, I cannot think of anything more important that drives the reality of the environments in our classrooms for all students. Not few students, all students. And we say all means all the time. We say best by kids, all the time. But the reality is, to ensure that that is a statement of truth, a statement of fact, there are hard, bold, difficult, complex conversations that need to be had to ensure that collective belief that we all have becomes the overall reality within our systems, within the cultures, within our schools. I've said a number of times, as you begin to look at school culture, Pam's looking at me because she only gave me 5 minutes. School culture, that the culture is defined in a school by adults. And a lot of times adults make decisions to say, let's do this program, let's do this initiative to improve student culture. Those all will fall to the wayside if we can't ensure that the adults in the building understand how their actions, how their relationships, how their behaviors, how their words, ultimately how their beliefs have an impact on children, all children. So upon coming to the school district of Indian River County, one of the first things I encountered was the African American Achievement Plan. And I encountered it in a way because it wasn't complete. And it was a plan that should be approved prior to the opening of every school year to be implemented over the course of a specific school year. We quickly looked at the plan that was in place, and I felt as if it was being done in a silo and two different perspectives, from a district perspective in terms of individual creating the plan, and then solely being created from a district perspective. So the level of involvement from a school site perspective wasn't anywhere where it needed to be. It was the district's plan, and if the district made its plan, the district would be okay, but transformation happens in schools. And you can't do anything unless you have schools fully implementing the plans that are being created, regardless of who is creating them. So we overhauled the plan. We did it in a collaborative, collegial way to create this plan moving forward. It had a great deal of accountability embedded into the plan. It is a priority of mine, hence the presence of my cabinet in this room, as well as other senior staff who will be here to problem solve with us today. As we approved the plan, ultimately drastically impacted by COVID-19, as was the rest of the world. So we had to pivot, not pause. And I say pivot, let's continue to create the systems that are necessary to collect data where data still can be collected. Let's continue to push the conversations from school sites' perspectives, really to gain a deeper understanding as to how we act, how we create the environments within our schools, and the environments, or the impact those environments are having on our students. So despite COVID, we have, as adults, as an organization, learned a great deal about who we are in the system and cultures that we have created as a system of schools. Today is an opportunity for us collectively, collegially, really to put our shoulders collectively to the wheel to continue to move this agenda forward. And it is a non-negotiable push. It is a push that I will continue to support, despite the perception, or despite the reality, or despite what others think. I know what is right as a husband. I know what is right as a father, and I will act accordingly. So in doing this work today is an opportunity to debrief, to revise and modify what will become our African American Achievement Plan moving in to the next school year. We have done some very innovative work regarding the creation of our strategic plan. It is a strategic plan that is 100% linked to what will be my key performance indicators, my evaluation. And that's absolutely the way it should be. Tied to my performance, my evaluation, tied to the performance of the system as a whole. We will be taking that item to our school board in the next school board meeting to finally approve the plan, which is the strategic plan, as well as the action that will take place by each of the offices led by a cabinet member, as well as principals over the course of the next year to obtain the KPIs for each and every single administrator as well as myself. So systematically, we are designed in a way to focus our energy on the areas in which we have collectively determined our priorities to move the district forward. Just as my evaluation will be tied to the district strategic plan, every cabinet member's evaluation will be tied to the specific work assigned to them within the strategic plan, just as principals will be held accountable to the outcome of their particular school. And let me say this very, very clearly, accountable to the outcome, not just the implementation, not just checks you can put in a box saying, hey, I've done these things, so therefore, regardless of the outcome, regardless of the impact I've had on children, I'm good. Absolutely not. And to be very honest with you, as I overshare, just how I work, the evaluation system that we just went through, 2/3 of it was on self-assessments or implementation of things, but not on the outcome, and only 1/3 of it was on the outcome. So they always say if you want to know what's important, look at where you spend your money. According to my American Express statement, it's food for me. But I think the same holds true here. Do we value the outcome, the quality of life that we're providing for students, or are we just about going through the motions? So the good news is, as a result of our reorganization last night, we are going to completely overhaul that evaluation system, and very excited about how we're going to be evaluating administrators, because it will be a system that says we need to produce. Not because for any other reason that we need to be best by kids. And that's where we need to hold ourselves accountable to the outcome, which is the improvement of lives for children as a result of our interactions and relationships and instruction and teaching that we provide for them. So I say all of that to give a level of assurance that as we recreate the African American Achievement Plan, that it is 100% embedded in our district strategic plan, and that we don't have two different plans that are pulling us in opposite directions. We have one plan that is embedded and created in a way to identify what our priorities are and streamline the work around those priorities. So in doing this work today, I would ask for everyone to be open, to be honest, to be bold, to be collective. I made a commitment to the school board and to the community, as I have said publicly, if this plan goes back to the board and is the same plan, then fundamentally we have failed. And I said that because I knew as we would implement, we would learn, we would make mistakes, but we would be open, honest, and reflective in our implementation to define how to be more impactful or powerful as we went through this work. And as a result of that organizational learning, we would hold ourselves accountable to changing our behaviors and or practices to improve impact. And that really is the purpose of today, to evaluate us, to evaluate the systems and structures that have been created to determine how to improve the impact that we have on children, how to improve the impact in creation of cultures or environments that allow students to feel safe and to feel comfortable. That is this work today. I thought it would be important that we don't do this work in isolation. There are individuals in our community, there are families and parents in our community who are extremely invested in this work, as evidenced by our board meeting last night. People want change. They want cultures and environments in the schools where every children can walk in to feel safe and to feel comfortable, and know that they're accepted, valued, and equal in our schools, and that when the school district of Indian River County says all means all, it's a truthful statement. But last night isn't the completion of that work, it is ultimately the beginning of that work. And the work that we do today brings us brings us closer to creating that reality. So I will turn it over to Ms. Dampier, who will lead us through the agenda. Be bold in your asks. Be bold in your questioning. We all collectively need to work together in order to define a reality in our schools that ensures every student has the opportunity to connect to the adults within those buildings. And as they walk in, they feel safe, they feel comfortable, they feel valued, they feel loved. And as a result of that relationship, they can connect to the quality of instruction, and we can empower them with the skills, the ability, the behaviors, the knowledge to spend a lifetime not only maximizing their potential, but continuously redefining and enhancing that potential. And that is a bold, big, long statement that I say probably at least 10 times a month, but it is what we are striving for here in the School District of Indian River County. Ms. Dampier, let us have it.
Good morning, everyone. That was a long 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you for joining us today. As Dr. Moore said, this is not one department's plan or one school's plan. This is the entire district's plan. And that's why we're here today to collaborate. So it's not done in isolation. It's part of the equity committee. They give feedback, as well as the different offices will provide feedback, so we can own the plan as a district. As well as we have Dr. Warrior and we have Mrs. Wall that are on distance social media listening and going to participate today throughout the agenda today. Without further ado, this is the agenda for today. From 9 to 12, it's going to be packed. So first, welcome and introduction. Then we're going to have Dr. Long, who's going to give us feedback from the principal's root cause analysis that Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Long facilitated a couple of weeks ago, as well as we'll have Dr. McMahon. He's going to lead the rest of the session with end of the year data review. He's also going to show how the African American Achievement Plan aligns to our new strategic plan. Because we need to, like Dr. Moore says, we're not going to keep reinventing the wheel. We want to see that alignment and be able to do the work collaboratively. And then, of course, the last part of the morning session will be stakeholder feedback on the data reporting format. We heard you loud and clear. We've gotten a lot of feedback as far as the data and as far as the African American Achievement Plan is a little overwhelming. So what we're going to do, we're going to continue with that appendix data, but we're going to have that on the website as an addition. So anybody that wants to go and click and see that data will be able to see that as a collective whole. What we're going to propose today is looking at what will go on as the appendix of the African American Achievement Plan, similar to what we have with the strategic plan, so it's not overwhelming. So that he's going to lead us with getting feedback from our stakeholders in the room with that session. Then from 12 to 1 p.m., lunch will be provided. We will have the multi-purpose room as well as the large instructional room, conference room. You'll get lunch from in the multi-purpose room, and you can go to those particular areas, as well as be in the center. We're going to be doing groups in the afternoon, so we're going to be moving around in here. So if you can sort of stay in the center aisle. And then from 1 to 4, we will transition and have groups. Now you may say, how are we going to do that with the social distancing? We're going to be in corners, and we have district leaders, goal facilitators, who will be leading that work. And they will be rotating from group to group, and the people that are in the groups will remain. But our goal facilitators, and we'll get into that from 1 to 4. Then from 4 to 5:30, you're going to have dinner break on your own. And then we're going to come back from 5:30 to 8. This is where because they would have collected information, the goal facilitators, from all of the groups for each goal area. They're going to share out that goal information, and then in your packet, you'll see like a light blue, sky blue sheet. That's your feedback form. We're going to ask that you give us additional feedback from what is being shared. So this is going to be a continuous cycle of feedback. Then Dr. McMahon, based on what is stated in the stakeholder feedback for the data reporting format, is going to also complete or give a sample of what was stated in 9 to 12 to give you a draft of what the data reporting format will look like, and then get feedback on that again. And then we're going to close with a reflection. So we have a jam-packed day. So without further ado, I wanted to make sure that we had an idea of what our equity classrooms should look like. And when we think of equity, we a lot of times think of personnel, we think of different things, but our number one priority is in the classroom. So I'm going to show you a video that says creating equity in our schools. It's a 3-minute video, very short. And then after that, we're going to have Dr. Long come on up.
Equity is meeting the needs of children and recognizing the academic needs are connected to their social, emotional, physical needs, and making sure that in serving those needs that we're not making excuses but always focused on outcomes. First, create a learning climate that's positive, where kids feel supported and safe, where it's okay to make mistakes, and where learning is nurtured and curiosity is tapped into children. Kids who are curious will do better academically. Second, get to know each and every child, because the more you know about your children as people and as learners, the more you'll know about how to serve them. And third, really focus on making teaching relevant to the lives of kids, making connections to make it meaningful. Kids can learn all kinds of things if the teacher has the ability to make connections with the child.
Good morning. I'm sure he'll be finding the PowerPoint in a
In the
moment. But if
context
you
of
look in your
education,
packet,
the term equity has come to mean the
there's a
need.
PowerPoint. It's in pink PowerPoint that I'm going to be reviewing. And it says achievement gap. So the first part of that information is the problem symptoms. And you've heard this many times before, as Dr. Moore has referred to them in many of the meetings that he's conducted. We know that African American and non-white Hispanic achievement gap, we are 45th in the state ranking. We know that in 2018, 2019, ELA, 3rd through 10th grade, our percentage level at 3 or above. For our non-white students, we're at 64%. So that is a noticeable gap, as you can see. And for our African American and white non-Hispanic achievement gap, state ranking for that, for the math, we're at 43 out of 67 districts, as you well know. And in 2018, 2019, the combined mathematics district percentage for 3 or above, African American students were at 35%, and our non-Hispanic white students at 66%. So again, there is a huge gap there that is evident. And also here, for the last problem symptom, 2018, 2019, percent of each subgroup of students enrolled in advanced coursework, and those classes would include honors, dual enrollment, advanced placement, and international baccalaureate. Again, we see that there are some huge discrepancies between our white students and our our African American students. So that's just that data, background information. So on last week, Dr. Jacobson and I got together with some principals and some APs, school-based leadership, to talk about what are the root causes. Why is this occurring in our opinions and in what we have seen and what's happening on our campuses? And so we had some intermediate causes. Uh-oh, I forgot the clicker. Too many things in my hands here. Thank you, Sam. So there were some intermediate causes that came out of that conversation with these about 11 to 12 school-based leaders. And some of those intermediate causes were misinterpretations of cultural behaviors, backgrounds, experiences that educators may not be familiar with. As we know, and I've learned over the years, that in a classroom setting, when you teach, you tend to teach from where you're from. So you teach middle of the road most times, but you also tend to teach from a modality that you're comfortable with, not always understanding that your students may need a different modality. So sometimes that can be a problem. And then when you don't understand the cultures of those students, we have many students in our classrooms. We have white students, Hispanic students, black students, students from Nicaragua, students from different places. And if you don't understand where they're from and what their cultures are, it can be difficult sometimes to reach them and teach them at a level where they can be successful. Differing definitions across cultures of problematic behavior. So we know that oftentimes, and I'll speak about my race, in the black culture, we talk loudly. And a lot of times it's because when we're home, everybody else is talking loudly too. And so in order to be heard, you got to speak loudly to get that attention. But in a formal classroom setting, when students do that, sometimes if you don't understand that culture of ours, you mistake it for something else. Being loud, being belligerent when you're asked to quiet down or be quiet and you still hear that conversation, yeah, that happens. So it's good to know the cultures of the individual students that you're working with to help kind of understand how to handle that, because it's just a natural occurrence for us to talk loudly. Instructional strategies used and delivered. And if you go through the theory of learning, you will understand that there are a lot of different instructional strategies that can be utilized. But the point is to understand and tap into those instructional strategies that work with those particular groups of students, because every child learns differently. One size does not fit all. So we have to be very diverse in how we are delivering instruction when we are teaching. Misattributions of need for scaffolding for problem solving. Sometimes we water down way too much. Yes, kids need to have a basis or a foundation, but we can't assume that they're ignorant about everything. They do have intelligence, and so we have to tap into that intelligence level where they are and build them from there. And lack of related instruction and instructional materials to backgrounds of students, and I already spoke to that. A lot of times when you understand where a student is from, you understand what their interests are, you have to build those relationships. Relationship building is key to teaching any child or even an adult. If I don't have a relationship with you, I don't care what you have to say or how you say it or how much education you have in an area, because it just doesn't matter, because I don't feel like you care about me, so I don't care about what you think of me. Am I pressing? Nope. The other way. So then we got to the root causes. So, everyone agreed, okay, so these are those intermediate causes. But again, the why. Why? Why? You got to keep asking why, as Christina says. Why? Well, let's go again. Why to that? Why? Why? So here are the root causes that came up, and it was a long list. And yes, I'm reading to you today. A need for more instructors that are reflective of students' backgrounds. And we know that in Indian River County, we do not have enough African-American teachers, nor do we have enough Hispanic or Creole. It's just a matter of fact. But we have to work really hard to ensure that we are out recruiting and getting these individuals here and keeping them here, because they're going to make the difference in our classrooms and on our campuses with our students. There are different experiences among teachers from different cultural backgrounds. Yes, if you and I, who are not the same, are in conversation, we will see that, well, what I think is appropriate, you might think it's not appropriate, because, again, it's a cultural thing. So we need to understand that and be very, very mindful of how we treat students in that respect and each other when it comes to colleagues. A tendency to teach how we learn from our own cultural experiences. And I tapped on that a little earlier. That's just what it is. And empathy versus sympathy. You can have empathy for a child, but it should not turn into sympathy. You can't say that just because a child does not have the basics at home, they're suffering in some other area. That may not always be true. You have to have that relationship, building relationships day to day, one by one. Preconceived notions that may not be accurate, we have talked about that. Teachers may not have taken the time to identify students' interests. And again, you have to form relationships, understanding that sometimes there are 18, 22, 25, 28 students in a classroom. There are 180 school days throughout the course of the school year. There's time. Create that time because it's important in order to make that connection. A lack of comfort on consulting culturally different colleagues about cultural understanding. So you gotta have those courageous conversations. If you see a teacher that is not fulfilling what needs to be done in that classroom with certain students, then you need to talk about it. Don't just ignore it, because it's not gonna go away. You have to work at finding a solution so that that child feels safe, feels wanted, and can learn, because that's where we're ultimately trying to go. More root causes. Due to a lack of diverse staff, there's a lack of connection with access to ideas, feedback, experiences with culturally different colleagues. And again, this was not Dr. Jacobs and I giving these causes. These were the leadership that are at the schools who are on the main front every day, and they are working with these students. And these are the things that they see. Not all staff is adequately prepared to discuss cultural issues, and we know that to be a fact. Because if you're not Black, you can't talk about Black issues in a depth like a Black person can unless you have those conversations and get to know exactly what's going on. If you're not white, if you're not Hispanic, same thing. You have to work on building relationships, not just with the students, but also with your colleagues in order for you to be successful. Lack of weaving the development into cultural competency into the fabric of the school year. Again, creating a culture where everyone feels wanted, everyone is invited, everyone has an opportunity to learn and learn at the highest possible level in order for them to be successful, which reflects the district being successful, because it will show as time goes on when they have to do those tests and assessments. A lack of infrastructure to have focused, ongoing conversations about culture. This was a big one, because these educators, these leaders felt like they don't have the time or the space to have these courageous conversations with each other. Because a lot of times you might have questions, but if you never feel like you're in a safe space to talk about it or to ask about it, it doesn't happen. So we need to make sure that we're trying to create these spaces, not just for the adults, also, but for the students, because they need that too. They have things that they want to talk about, things that they feel like they need to address, and they don't always know how to do that. So we have to give them an opportunity to learn how and also to do it. A need to build leadership capacity through participation first and restorative practices, and then cultural responsive training. They said that they want that, they need that, and we should provide that. So that's another one of the root causes. Need to provide safe spaces for teachers to practice and receive feedback related to implementing culturally responsive practices prior to applying it to students. If you don't know, you can't do. And if you can't do, students don't learn. It's just that simple. And sometimes educators feel more efficient by defaulting to those things that are familiar and are done with more ease. I'm real comfortable doing a lot of the things I do. Being at church, running church groups, singing in the choir, directing everybody to do what they're supposed to do. I'm comfortable doing that because that's what I do all the time. But other people may not be. So you have to give them practice. You have to teach before they can learn. And yet, more root causes. Sometimes it feels exhausting to continue to step forward against racism when you don't have a lot of support. And I can speak for here in Indian River County. This is beginning my 36th year, and that is very true. There is no support. Thank you for clapping, Beth. There is no support if a person feels like you're of no value and what you have to say is not important. That needs to change, and that's what our leadership is saying as well. Lack of action steps, the how, and the accountability for them. They feel like there isn't enough or there are none. So what are we going to do about that? How are we going to address that? Because that is a part of the problem. Need to address those staff members with a mixed mindset. Again, this is coming from our leaders in the district. They feel as though it's not happening and there's not a space for it to happen, and that leadership is not addressing it. It's an issue. A need to ask the appropriate questions, driving questions. But sometimes people tend not to ask questions because they feel like they know the answer, or they feel like they're going to be targeted or shunned because they're asking those questions. Because the questions can be hard, because you have to really think about it before you answer it, because you just can't answer it from your lens. You have to have the total lens in order to do that, to make it real for them. Aren't even aware that we have those biases, and that's true too. I used to tell people all the time, I have a real problem. I don't like skinny people. And it's not that I don't like them, I don't like sometimes their attitudes, you know? But when I get to know them, we're good. We're real good. I used to be skinny, so we're good. But, you know, sometimes you have to kind of step out of your comfort zone and ask those questions. And make sure that people, once you see that there is a bias, then you need to address that bias. Because if you just let it go, it festers like a sore, and then it spreads, and it corrupts the whole organization. And we need to stop doing that. Anti-racism is politicized, and need expectations that we are all not anti-racist. I think we left that word out. Is that what it was, right? Yes, yeah. So, and I think we've taken a great step with that on last night. I heard about it, I didn't see it, but that we have put some things in place within our student code of conduct that addresses those things that make people feel unwanted, uneasy, discriminated against. There's unrest. So moving forward, my hope is that those things will change for our students, but even more so for the adults, because we have adults in this system too that feel the same way, but sometimes they don't voice it. And some of the additional notes, see, we finally got through all the root causes, but some of the additional notes that some of the leadership made was that demography is not destiny. And Dr. Jacobs really harped on that. I think this was made by Mrs. Arnett, because she feels like sometimes we look at students at where they're from and those things about them, and we determine their destiny for them. You can't do that. You have to look at every child as a potential president, doctor, lawyer, politician, whatever it may be, to get your mindset up here. Because when you have low expectations, people live up to the expectations that you have. And that's just not children. That's adults as well. So we need to really look at and address that and make sure that we're not doing that. Need to include students as meaningful stakeholders in equity work. We need to ask them, what do you feel? You know, how are you feeling here? What do you think about your campus? How do you feel in your classroom when you go in the classroom and you see just all white students and you one black student if it's in a higher level course? How does that make you feel? How are you treated? We need to ask them and let them give us feedback, and then we work from there, because they're the ones experiencing it every day, not us. That's important. Need to be visible in the communities. We know we don't have a lot of that, especially from a lot of our counterparts in our system. Our white teachers, I see very few of them visiting the black community. We have one principal who's there a lot, but that's just one, and there's more than one. So we really need to look at that. And the vice versa, we need to have black leadership and black teachers in the white communities and the Hispanic communities, because it takes all of us working together. And then a need for face-to-face PD to practice, in which every staff member has a voice in that plan. Everybody doesn't want to be just told what they have to do. Sometimes they want to have an opportunity to give some input, because believe it or not, what they may tell you may be very worthwhile and may give you a different lens to look at the work that has to be done. That is my presentation. Are there any questions?
I would be curious to know, provide the opportunity for anyone to provide feedback. And as I listen to the presentation, I try to take it in, just so everyone can hear me. I try to take it in from my roles and my responsibilities, and I would challenge everyone to do the same, and not to have this external locus of control, but to really allow it to really sink in and say, within the area or the responsibility charged to me to have influence and growth within this system, where are opportunities for change? So as I listen to it, and once again, the data that we're using in that strategic plan, I think it speaks so loudly regarding the opportunity to bring about change. It is extremely, extremely, I say powerful, but it is disgusting is probably a better word to use when you look at the disparity of where white children perform versus African American students and Hispanic students and economically disabled students. It is absolutely absurd. And even the overall proficiency in looking at the community as a whole, there is no explanation as to why we're dead or right under the 50th percentile or right at the 50th percentile. It makes no sense. So a level of unease regarding that truth. And sometimes I feel as if, have we really put students first as a system or as a district, or are we just happy because kids say they're happy? And the reality is all kids aren't happy. And performance impacts those children for the rest of their lives. And as we problem solve and say maximize the potential of all students, there are students who have graduated from this system who went on to and this is not a problem because I went to a state school too, but went on to a state school. But if we would have met them with rigorous expectation and rigorous curriculum, they could have gone to an Ivy League school. Our relationships, our interactions with them could have shifted the trajectory of their life's path. But as long as you're happy, and happy could be defined as just not sharing how you really feel. So I find that data as opportunities for us to own, and us to shift, and us to change behavior. I also, which came to me, recruiting and retaining high-skilled teachers. And the way Dr. Long just shared this data, we struggle with improving, although we're doing much better this particular school year, we struggle with improving the ratio of our black teachers. But when you look at the academic performance of our black students, what family is going to want to move here? You want me to move and educate my child in a system where the overall proficiency is 47th, 48th? Absolutely. Why would I do that to the one I love the most? And that's just a truth that we need to acknowledge and quickly change. And I have been saying those numbers like that, but I think you just went from recruit, retain, and then you went right into those numbers, and I'm like, wow, what an uphill battle that is. In order to improve recruiting, retaining, maybe if we improve the quality of instruction and the level of proficiency for all students, maybe that would take care of itself. So any other feedback anybody had? I think it's powerful that this information came to principals in terms of the areas of development that we need to acknowledge, the space that we need to provide our teachers to have those challenging conversations. I hope from my perspective that I continue to set an example that the expectation is to have those conversations. I hope as a superintendent I'm setting an expectation that discomfort of one feels, whether they're a student or whether they are an administrator, a teacher, when they feel as if an injustice is taking place throughout the system, they have the courage and strength to speak up. And I think that is, for me, a big pivot in terms of previous expectation. But I know there's still opportunities. You know, words are wind, if you watch Game of Thrones. Actually, that would be if you read Game of Thrones. That really wasn't in. Words are just words, and it is about actions. But I know there are administrators in the system who done everything they were supposed to do to hold an individual accountable, to have them terminated because they're a flat-out racist, but yet the district failed them. That no longer can be the reality, and that no longer will be the reality. And I think we took drastic strides last night to correct that and provide that guidance, that expectation, as well as the support to principals to quickly find people home where they won't have a negative impact on kids. So I feel like I'm rambling now. Anybody else, just feedback on what you heard. Very powerful information, Dr. Long.
Yes, sir.
Now that some of the root cause analysis has been identified, now that some of the root cause analysis has been identified, it's incumbent to be real with the process. You know, people are looking at their jobs. You know, it's kind of like the wolf in sheep's clothing. How will we institutionalize this in the thought process, in the culture of this district, when for so many years, it's been the total opposite? You know, I hear what you're saying, but from my perspective, the old folks used to say a leopard don't change its stripes. So how can we, I know it starts at the top, but it also goes to the man in the mirror. And how can we as a district make sure that you're not perpetrating, that you are truly concerned and making a change and want the betterment for our children? So that's my concern. We have established some, I reiterate, some of the root causes, but there are many more that have not been brought up in this PowerPoint.
Understandably, and this was a sample group. This was not a collective group of everyone. And so I think that work needs to go forward. We need to have more conversations with more and all of the leaders, as well as teachers and students, to determine what those root causes are from everybody's lens. Then and only then will we get a true picture of what's really occurring in real time and in real life of our students and our teachers and our staff. Because they have a voice, and a lot of times that voice has not been heard. And so they're hoping now that this is a change. You know the song, "A Change Is Gonna Come"? So we're hoping that this change is coming and that there will be an opportunity for everyone to have a voice, and those people that should be listening are listening and willing and able to make those changes and provide those spaces where they can have these conversations and some real work can be done. So you're right. This is the tip of the iceberg, so to say. There's a lot more to be done, but I'm hopeful that the work will be done. We have an opportunity. The opportunity is now, and now is when we should do it. Yes. Oh, Dr. Warrior? Can you unmute her? Oh. Dr. Warrior, you need to unmute your mic, please. I need, Dr. Warrior, unmute your mic. Your mic is muted.
We can't hear you.
You can't unmute it? Yeah, go to participants. Hold on, Dr. Warrior, we can't hear you. Hold on, hold on. Unmute. Oh, that says mute. Wow. Dr. Warrior, we can't hear you. You need to unmute your microphone. Okay, but Dr. Warrior, if you can hear me, Dr. Warrior, put your thumb up. Can you hear me? Okay, you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Can you type what you want to say?
Why can't we hear
I
her?
don't know.
Claudia,
It's not. Dr. Warrior can hear me, she just can't speak. Oh.
Ms. Wall can hear? And
Yeah,
Can
and-
we hear Ms. Wall? Can Ms. Wall say something?
Miss Wall, can you unmute yourself and say something, see if I can hear you? I can't hear you either. Sorry, ladies, we're having some technical difficulties. Okay, now I can hear you, Miss Wall. Okay, Dr. Warrior, I think we can hear you now.
No.
Nope.
We hear her laughing. She needs to turn her volume up.
Can you turn your volume up anymore, Dr. Warrior?
No, no, no.
Oh, hold on.
Hold on.
We have a picture over here.
Privilege matters.
You still,
And so often what we are rewarding in schools is privilege, not effort, not ability, not innate.
turn that off.
I can hear you, Dr. Warrior.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
Loud and clear.
Dr. Warrior, I think we can try again.
Can you,
Yes.
We can hear you now, fragmented, but we can hear you.
okay.
How fragmented are we coming across to you?
You're coming across very clear, Mrs. Wall.
Okay.
Am I coming across
Yes.
very clearly?
Yes, you are now.
On our end, the whole first part of the presentation was missed because you were so choppy. But I'll just try to follow.
Okay, did you have a question or a comment?
Without being able to hear any of the comments on the root gap.
Okay, we'll work on that, making sure that you all have a clear audio. Was there any other questions? Okay. So Dr. Warrior, here's a suggestion. If you can see the video, but the sound is choppy, try turning off your video and just listen to the audio. I think you have all the handouts that we're going to be reviewing. If you want to do that, that might make it a little better for you to hear. And then once you want to comment, then you can turn your audio back on, your video back on as well. Just a suggestion.
Yes, the switching back and forth between documents on the computer different. Can you say you can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I don't know where you guys are in this process, but I had a question about the root cause analysis.
You had a question with root causes?
Yes, root cause analysis, the process. And what I was trying to determine if it was a survey or it was a root cause analysis, because as you know, root cause analysis have a structure. They can be done in different ways. It's really not a root cause analysis. This has been a concern I've had even with the African American Achievement Plan, that we talk about what we feel, what we think, what we intuit about situations. Some of that may be valid. Some of that is not. And so if we pick out root causes that are not valid and we do interventions there, we won't attain the outcomes that we want.
Okay, I heard some of that because it's very choppy. So we're going to continue to try to work on the audio so that we can hear you more clearly. And at some point, if you like, you and I can circle back on the presentation that I made to give you an opportunity to give me some of the feedback that you wanted to share. Is that doable for you?
I mean, we have no option, but I guess what I have to share to me sort of frames a lot of what we're talking about, discussing now as we go. To, if this is just to be a one-on-one between me and each, then perhaps this.
Okay, and we do want this to be meaningful. I did hear that part. So we're gonna keep trying to work on this to ensure that anyone who is listening in on audio and video are having a clear depiction of what's being said and what's being shown. Okay, I think that brings me to the end of my presentation, if there are no other questions or comments. Thank you.
data that was requested at the last equity meeting. We also want to show you currently how the strategic plan that's being proposed aligns with the African American Achievement Plan in its current state. And then also we wanted to get some feedback, some collective feedback from the participants on how we report data. We've obviously collected a lot of feedback, both anecdotally as well as purposefully asking various stakeholders about the data. So we want to make sure that we systematically collect that, and then to be able to show you kind of already some ideas that we have to make it easier. This past year is a little bit of a handcuff because the way that the data progress report was approved, since it was board approved, we really couldn't deviate too much from that. So there's little that we could do kind of during the year, but we have that opportunity now before the board approves this new set to really nail down what we want it to look like. So can we, there we go, sorry, thank you. So the whole idea with data is we need to make it understandable. And it's a bit of a challenge when you are talking about such a public thing. And it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge. It's a challenge to make the data understandable for all levels. We also need to make it meaningful. Data is our superpower if the data truly reflects what we think it reflects. So we want to make sure that that data that we're measuring is really capturing our efforts and our actions. And then obviously actionable. It's not just this mild curiosity that we want to satisfy. We want data that moves us to action. If there is no action that follows our data, then the data is worthless to us. We have no reason to spend any time on it because we don't have time to satisfy mild curiosities. We need to get to work. And then finally, we need it transparent, right? We want to make sure that what we're doing is open to all. So first, we want to go over some of the data. Now, just so you guys understand, this PowerPoint slide, I only took a snippet of this handout that you have. So you'll see that this, and I'm not sure, here, for you guys on the camera, this is the handout. I believe it was sent to you via file, electronic. And I wanted to explain, so one of the pieces of data we were asked to review is the Achieve 3000. I have 3 separate metrics that I am capturing in this sheet. So I want to make sure that I first explain what you're looking at, give you some time to digest what you're looking at to make sure you can ask some clarifying questions, and then I'll give you a chance to really kind of dive into the data to understand it and to ask some further clarification questions there. So the first one, the Achieve 3000 is an online platform where students go into various modules, and then one of the key indicators that you track within Achieve 3000 is what's called this average first try. So and I'm oversimplifying it, so forgive me. You read a passage, you take a quiz. The first time you take that quiz is your first try. And so what the research on Achieve 3000 shows is that if you have an average first try, it's 75% or better, then that's when the Lexile growth is going to come in. The idea is that the Achieve 3000 is not like, hey, read this and do a quiz. It actually has you walk through various exercises combined with instruction. It's just to give you an indication of how big of a group we're talking about. That is the overall enrollment at that grade level or that particular race ethnicity. All right? And then so with this, the top part in blue is Sebastian River High School. Then the next section in red is Vero Beach High School. And then down on the bottom, what I've done is kind of given it, instead of disaggregating by grade level and then race ethnicity, is I've just given you race ethnicity by each school. And then finally at the very bottom, I've given you the district numbers. Now you'll notice at the very bottom, I do have alternative ed, but I don't have it up top. And the reason for that is when I broke alternative ed by grade level and by ethnicity, every group was below 10. And so there wasn't really any data to show because it had to be masked, okay? Are there any clarifying questions on this first sheet? All right. So let me go on to the next 2. And forgive me, this is where we have that balance of making sure data is meaningful, but also understandable. And so I've done growth 2 different ways. And I don't mean to confuse, but I just want to make sure, because these offer 2 different perspectives. The first one is basically the growth, average growth, between any two scores. So you take each quarter, you get this Lexile, you get this score. It's an outcome measure. It's your read, for lack of more technical terms, how well you're doing in reading. And so you take it first quarter, you take it second quarter, you take it third quarter, you take it fourth quarter. But due to COVID, some kids do have a third quarter. Some kids technically had a fourth quarter because they did it at home, all right? And then because of scheduling, maybe it might be that a kid was in it just during the first semester, got the concordant score, and then they went out, and so they're no longer in the Achieve 3000. So what this first table does is it captures any two scores and what the growth is. It could be quarter 1 to quarter 4. It could just be quarter 1 to quarter 2, okay? Then the next one, the last one, I wanted to show you the annual growth, the average annual growth. So what this last sheet does is it only takes those kids who had a first quarter score and an end of year, either third or fourth quarter due to COVID. All right? And the reason why I did that is you'll notice the counts. The count of students on this last chart is a lot fewer students. And so I first did it this way, and then I thought, well, that's not really capturing the vast majority of students in the program. And so that's why I also did this second one. Okay? Are there clarifying questions on those two charts? I want to make sure that before you really kind of start tearing into numbers that you understand kind of what we're looking at. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think I'm looking at the second set that's stapled. Oh, sorry. The second set that's stapled, and I'm looking across the top at Sebastian.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on the Lexile growth of longest period between any two scores. You see the sheet I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. I sure do.
Okay, so there, when you talk about the numbers are different, are you talking about the number of students, right?
Yeah, so if you look across that row, you have
410 and then
81.3 for
249.
410. That means there's 410 students with two scores, any two scores anywhere in the school, right? Or during the year. And then if you flip to that third chart, you now see it's only 249. But the average Lexile point growth went up. Well, those 249, that represents an annual growth period. That's the entire year. It's consistent. You're doing apples to apples. This is the average growth of a kid, all the kids who started in the program first quarter and proceeded through the whole year.
Okay,
All right?
just wanted to make sure.
The reason why I did, and it's kind of out of order, I started with that one, the 249. And I'm like, well, this isn't really capturing a lot of the kids in it. So
Yep, thank you.
you're welcome. Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall, do you have any questions?
Other than, now, are you going to use I'm looking at why we're using the Achieve 3000, because it reports more regularly than, say, the FSA score, or what's best, whatever it's going to be. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. You paused there for a moment, or at least it broke out for
Yeah,
a
I
quick
was just curious, when I saw these tables, Lexile scores are shown, and how do we plan to use it? Is this just, you're talking now just about supplemental data that helps get to the African American achievement?
Yes.
Or are you planning on including all of this data in the plan?
So this was a request of the Equity Committee to review the Achieve 3000 data. They wanted to look at it in a variety of ways. So that's primarily. Now, to answer your question, absolutely, this is not FSA data. It is meant, though, to provide kind of that data that leads to it. Lexile is a heavily researched metric. This is not something that Achieve 3000 is saying, hey, according to Achieve 3000, you're a level 1 or a 2 that they've made up. This is tying it to that Lexile score. And so there's research that shows that as Lexile goes up, comprehension goes up and so forth. So this is the progress measure we use for those 9th and 10th grade students who are in the intensive reading class.
Okay, how does this crosswalk with FSA scores? Have we taken the Lexile scores for students and then compared it to their outcome, the actual outcome on the state standard?
we did an initial analysis year one, and it showed some correlation. It wasn't heavily, and it was due more because of that first year of implementation. We really didn't get to where a quality, like we're really doing this the way that it ought to be until late in the first semester. And then this year, when we were really going to really do a lot of that correlation analysis, COVID hit.
Okay, so the only thing I know is we did inundate with data. And this is just a comment to the equity committee, is that it's not correlated with real outcome data will measure. And so how useful is this really?
Yeah, so I will say that they have an extensive set of research that does tie Achieve 3000 to FSA results. And if you would like, I would be more than happy to share that with you. That, of course, was done on a state level. It was not specific to Indian River students, but it is whenever we have these, be it iReady, Achieve 3000, these outside, we are looking at what research do they have to make sure that's an evidence-based strategy, that there is some results. So they do have some white papers available, and I'd be more than happy to share those with you, that shows that this program does equate to gains on FSA.
Okay, I mean, it would be helpful, but it would be more helpful, I think, the equity to see data.
Okay, absolutely. And I'll be honest with you, the reason why I didn't, it is it's a technical paper, but certainly what I can do is maybe provide a summary as well along with it, so you can kind of get both of it. So, but absolutely, we'll be glad to share that.
Dr. McMahon?
Yes.
Hi. Can I request that document also, please?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How long has the district used Achieve 3000? When was it implemented?
Last year was well, let me specify since we're in the summer. 18-19 was the first year that we implemented it, and 19-20 was the second year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
My questions were similar to their two questions. How does this correlate with our students at this place and this time? You know, you're giving me data, but it's abstract. You know, I know you said it correlates with FSA and all of that, but in real time, how does it give a definitive overview of how our students are doing?
So the Lexile growth, the Lexile point, I know it's not FSA. I know it's not like what our school grade is, but Lexile score is an external measure. It's not something specific to Achieve 3000. There is a whole lot of stuff out there about Lexile scores. And that is how, and if someone has a better explanation in the room, please jump in. It's basically, it's kind of like an achievement level. It is but the difference is that you can distinguish between a third grader reading on grade level versus a 10th grader. The scale score keeps going up. And so when you look at this, I know it's not how many more students are a level 3. I know it's not that kind of tying. With iReady and some of these other things, our unit assessments, we know that if you score 55, that is the average score of a level 3 learner. So we know that when we're doing our unit assessments, we're shooting for that 55% target to ensure that those kids are level 3, because level 3, that's what we know. And that was to Dr. Warrior's point or question, we have not had that opportunity yet to do it for our students because of the COVID. So what we're doing is we're relying on evidence-based measures. We know based on the research that was done on Achieve 3000 outside of Indian River County in the state of Florida, we know that the program does get kids to read better. Kids to read better. Not the adults, though. Sorry.
What I'm getting from this, we don't see the beginning points of the students. We just see the average growth. And if we're talking about achievement gaps, we have to recognize that the African-American students are starting at a point on aggregate below the white students. So what we would need to do to close the achievement gap is to see greater growth in the African American students than the white students. And so that's what I would take from this, is to say the growth in some places is equal and some places is still disproportional in the wrong direction. And in some places it seems as though we may be on a better track to close the achievement gap, because using a product like this, it just helps us measure the growth of different demographic groups without the, so I mean, we can use it to say the start point too.
Yes.
But this data specifically that you ran here, Dr. McMahon, is showing us the growth, which is, you know, not enough to close the achievement gap at a rate that we would want, right? And in some places, not at all. So I think that that's what I take from this chart, is looking at the difference in growth.
Shouldn't we put an asterisk by it? Rather than, for a novice, being fed this data could be misconstrued as to be relevant or evidence of something factual. So,
I think it's relevant. I mean, it's relevant. I mean, it's.
but if you take this and you go to the classroom with Johnny, and you set this up with Johnny, does it define where Johnny is in real time?
It can, yes. This data is only showing the growth, but you can see where Johnny's actual Lexile is, which does relate to a performance at or above grade level. Yes, just is not on this specific data run.
Just kind of an asterisk should be by it, in my opinion.
I agree, because and we're not used to this in the community. We're not used to, because we've only, this is the second year of doing it. So I agree with that, and let me kind of go back and see what I can do to kind of help make more sense of that for the community as well.
And if I can add, I was executive director for secondary, and last night, well, that has been my title, but working with the high schools with the Achieve 3000. And this is a newer program for our schools, but what they do is really dive into what point are they, because we have a whole matrix of this student has this Lexile, this means they're at this percentile for that grade level, and it will tell them. The students that you're seeing represented here, they are intensive reading students. These are the students we are trying to move. And so when I see some of the movement and that puts those point gains, I'm celebrating that. Is it where we need to be? Absolutely not. But it's showing me we are headed in that direction. We need to continue. We do need to also look at the matrix as to what grade level are they reading on. That's important to us. And the 11th and 12th grade students that you see, a very small number, I wanted to mention that those are ESOL students. So those are the only ones that are taking the Achieve 3000. But your point is very well taken. It's how do you make sense of that, just a growth that may not be very meaningful, but if we can see where they're starting at and what is their ending point. And I'll tell you what, some of these scores I did celebrate with the principals and the staff and say, look where you're moving. And others were saying, why are the students not moving in our intensive reading? Those classes are for our kids to make those gains and closing the gap.
So one more point. What I'd like to do is, in just kind of talking, and the idea is, what is the average Lexile growth in a year? I think if we had that, if I told you that, you know, in 9th grade, the average growth was 50 points. And then we see here, holy cow, they've made 70, like, okay, now we're making up a year's growth. So I think that might help do some context. The other thing too is that in the absence of a general outcome measure, we're looking for general outcome measures to figure out where kids are. The Achieve 3000, the Lexile, is what we call a general outcome. It's not prescriptive, it's not formative, it's saying this is the level at which the kid is at. So what we're showing here is, even though we don't have that starting point, we do know they're level 1 and 2 learners. These are the kids that are not performing. So we know to some extent what the starting point is, and we're showing, hey, this general outcome measure, they've grown 70 points in the context of a year, right? So if I gave you, or if we provided also kind of that typical annual growth, would that maybe help kind of provide some answers to what the point you're making? Perfect.
Well, you know, I think that it's fine. I see that the growth, the average growth, is more of the district. For well, in the African American Achievement Plan, I'm going to be interested in how a Black student scores on state and measures the state stand. I mean, the growth is great and good, and that's so I'm just trying to think you know, since we have so much data connected to this and sort of what thought we put.
Point well taken. All right. She's saying growth is important, but we want to know where kids are, right? We need to know, and that's kind of the fear is that, yeah, I could have given you well, yes. I mean, it's a point well taken, yes. All right, so. The next is the discipline. I was asked to provide the risk ratios pre-COVID. This is discipline data. It's from the African American Achievement Plan. It does show, I just did a snippet of the very bottom of that plan. You don't have a separate sheet of this. When we printed out the PowerPoint, thought that was pretty clear there with it. So I just want to make sure with risk ratio, it gets bantered about like, hey, what's your risk ratio? Understand that risk ratio is just a tool. It's a measurement tool. It's like saying percentage or average or median. Risk ratio is just a comparison of two risks. Anytime you've ever said you're 3 times as likely or 5 times as likely, that's in essence a risk ratio. It's just a way of interpreting it. So risk ratios, you can see along the bottom here, you've got a lot of different risk ratios. It's because it depends on what you're measuring. The news today, COVID is hitting our minority populations at there's a greater risk ratio for it, right? And so it all depends on the context. So the risk ratio you see up here is under whatever it is that it is measuring. So the 2.75, that is under the sum of the ODR. So that means that our black students are 2.75 times as likely to receive an ODR than our white students are. It gives a relative risk. It's not just comparing numbers. It's not saying, hey, our white students received 1,000 ODRs and our black students I'm gonna keep saying that, received 500. Oh, our white students are getting written up more than, no, because there's a lot more white students in general than there are. So what this risk ratio does is it puts those two numbers in context to how many of our population is in each of those subgroups, okay? So when we do say the 2.75, that is taking into account the overall population of African American students versus our white students. Any questions on that? You are absolutely right. Any other clarifying questions?
In the ODRs, enrollment, African American, 3,564. ODRs, 3,167. Are those numbers correct?
Yeah, so out of the 3,564 students that came into our schools at any point during the year, 897 of them received at least one ODR for a total of 3,167.
Okay, I backed up. I got it now.
So then if you look at the next number, the 25.2%,
right,
that would mean a quarter of all black students received an ODR. It's twice as high of a percentage as white students.
True. Now I'm calling it vertical, horizontal. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, sir. Anything else? Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall, any questions?
I'm trying to my headset in to see if this helps.
That came through a lot clearer than before.
Okay, but I'm using this. Oh, yes. Yes, much better. Okay. Okay, good, good.
All right, so then, all right, yes, ma'am.
So on this same chart with the ODRs, is it possible, this is just a question, to get this breakdown by schools?
Yes.
Because I think the community will be interested in seeing it broken down by schools as well.
Yeah. Yep,
Okay.
absolutely, and
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
I'm
Thank
not
you.
belaboring because I know that's where we're going next.
Okay, no
Yep.
problem, thank
No
you.
worries. So the next slide, and I want to make sure this is.
Hi, this is Carrie. I have a question.
Oh, yes.
Hi, this is Carrie Barenborg. I also want that same data by school, please, and I want it given to all the school board members.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the next slide is meant to capture what the DOE puts out in their LEA profile when they talk about the risk ratio of classroom removals. The LEA profile is what the DOE issues for exceptional student education. It has a variety of data elements that they monitor. A few years ago when we were was sanctioned for the risk ratio, it was this metric. And I want to make sure it's clear because with this metric, what the DOE through that ESE and the LEA profile and the sanctioning process, the CEIS, this is specific to Black ESE students versus all other ESE students. And so what I've done is I've broken it out so that Black ESE versus ESE white, ESE Hispanic versus ESE white. And so the 2.72 means that our ESE Black students are still disproportionately being removed from classrooms.
+17729255398 is now exiting.
So the Black ESE students, 2.72 times as likely to be removed from classrooms than our ESE white students. And then the Hispanic, you see how that number is below 1? That actually means that they are they have a reduced risk, underrepresented in those referrals. So they have a reduced risk. They're 0.66 times as likely to be removed as the white students. Any questions on that? All right, so the next set of data I was asked to review is the iReady data. iReady data, it provides metrics in a variety of forms. You have a scale score that you can show progress from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade. You have what's called a grade placement, so that if I'm a 3rd grader, it's going to tell me I am operating or reading at a 3rd grade level early, or maybe I am 4th grade, or maybe I'm behind, I'm reading at a 1st grade level. It's also going to give us a percentile, which is a metric that shows you how well that child is doing relative to their peers. And so what we've done is to make it a little bit more pleasing to the eye, a little bit more so we can see kind of overall where our students are, is I have taken that grade level placement and color-coded them. And so what you'll see in this graph over here on the right are all of our students K to 8. The red represents the percentage of students who are 2 or more grade levels behind. Yellow would represent 1 grade level behind, and then green would represent those students who are on grade level or above. okay? And so first on the right, we have all students, and then I've also broken out elementary versus middle grades. And again, this is just summary, high-level view. We can certainly disaggregate a little bit further, but just to give you kind of this overall glimpse and to start this idea of this is what iReady can provide us. Did that. I do have the next slide broken out by actual grade level. This is winter diagnostic. The spring diagnostic, certainly used as a measure of engagement with our online learning, but we know that it's not due to COVID and taking the diagnostics home. We know it's not a fully accurate or valid measure of where kids truly are. So any clarifying questions on what the red, yellow, green means or how I've broken it out? Okay. And then the next slide, and I'm going to go through this just so I'm going to give you a chance to look at it, but I at least want to just explain what it is and make sure that you guys have a chance to ask those clarifying questions so you understand what you're looking at. The next page, what I've just done, I thought this was interesting, is shown it by grade level. And then the percentages are there. So obviously at the early grade levels, our ability to pinpoint on and off is you have a narrower window just because, for lack of better way of explaining it, you only have, say, 10 standards that we're measuring progress on, whereas as you get older, that gap, that achievement gap becomes more noticeable, right? But I did want to showcase just how going from K to 8, how our percentages increase in the red and decrease in the green. Any clarifying questions on that? Okay.
Now,
yes.
I have what, are you on, I'm trying to keep up now, slide.
We are on iReady Winter Diagnostics Reading. It is the one that has Black African American as a table, white as a table, and then Hispanic as a table.
Okay.
So basically it's the second iReady chart that we're on. And you'll see that those first 2 pages are reading. The next 2, it's the same setup except for it's now math.
Yes.
So the first of the math shows all students, elementary grades and then middle grades. And then the fourth iReady chart, it shows the math by grade level for Black students, white students, and Hispanic students. Yes, sir.
African American. The drastic increase in your red starting in 3rd, 4th grade, when they move into 5th, has anybody tried to determine the root cause of that? I mean, that's drastic.
Doing a very good job, Chris.
We've had conversations about why we see that happen around 4th or 5th grade. And if you really think about it, in 4th grade, they are, in the earlier grades, they're learning to read. And then as they go up through the grades, they are reading to actually learn. And so if you already have some skill deficits that are present, what happens is as the texts become more complex, as you need to have that general fund of knowledge that you gain from reading to learn, then what happens is that you see an increase in those gaps, those achievement gaps during that time. It really exacerbates or really emphasizes those gaps at that time because of the change of how the curriculum is in 4th and 5th grades. There is a marked change. Also, there's a lot of discussion at the middle school level of how are we specifically addressing the reading deficits that we're seeing, because, you know, when I look at it, I'm really looking at the middle school grades. And I know Mr. Meyer has already, as he's come in, he has already been looking very closely at the secondary level. It is a need that we've had for years and years and years to really hone in on those skill deficits and provide true meaningful intervention at the middle school grades based upon real prescriptive types of instruction, meaning you have a deficit here, therefore we're going to provide intervention here. And so that work is starting, but that has been a need for some time.
You know, just if I was a CEO and I was looking at this as an innate product, I would seriously have to look at my staff, my management. Something in Denmark's not kosher. When you can see that drastic a change from 4th grade to 5th grade. And, you know, I go back to the man in the mirror. Because this, I've seen it, Dr. Warrior and I have discussed it. But when you're looking at it in this manner, it's appalling.
It is.
I think one also, going back to that video we started with Mr. Figueroa, one of the first things he said is that equity means academic is connected to SEL, social emotional learning. And so when we look at such things as discipline, and we see that at K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, our black students are being suspended way more than our white students, it almost gives the impression that it's like, you know, here is our environment, you have to assimilate here. And what Dr. Long was talking about, that root causes, is about understanding the differences in where each of our children come from and creating an environment that embraces diversity rather than saying this behavior is not welcome here. So I agree with you. I think that there is certainly disparities, and your eyes are pointing to the right place. Any other questions, comments? Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall, Ms. Barenborg?
You've gone through the iReady diagnostic math too.
Yes, well, we're kind of talking about it all collectively here.
Okay.
I wanted to first make sure that everyone understood the charts, and then now that that's kind of clear, we're just in general talking about what the data is telling us.
Right. I think it's important that we talk about format, you know, and then I guess we can mix it.
I apologize, Dr. Warrior. I personally did not hear that last thing. You said it's important to talk about what?
No, I said I agree with you. If we can just get some formats down that we can agree to and have consistency,
gotcha. Yes.
That's very important as we look at the data.
I agree. Any other questions, concerns, comments about the data? I will say that this kind of ends the data review portion. We're going to move into the alignment of the strategic plan with the African American Achievement Plan next, but I don't want to move on unless we've resolved all issues, comments, concerns.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
Is there a reason why our district takes the state's data, which is always provided in a 5-year format, and omits 2 of the 5 years?
We do also look, depending on what the data is, we do look at longer term goals. I think the problem with the state is that when you do start to look as a habit at 5 or more years, the assessments change every so often at the whim of the politician. So sometimes you're not dealing with comparing apples to oranges. I have to be honest, I don't know why in this case we went to 3 years. I thought that was a feedback from when we first started tearing apart in crafting the progress report early on with this the 1920 African American Achievement Plan. It was said that 3 years would give a good baseline of where we are. but it's other data, school grades. We've looked historically at the beginning of when school grades were first issued, graduation rates. A lot of times we look at more 5-year trends. We haven't seen a lot of differences or changes in the graduation rate. But so I would say as a whole, we generally, it depends on what the data is. In this case, and it kind of goes back to when I started, the progress report is board approved, and not wanting to kind of change or alter what was approved, we just move forward with it.
But referencing your statement about the political changes to education and the changes of the standards, that would be captured in the 5 years because it was implemented 5 years ago. And it's interesting actually to track and see how other districts have taken on that responsibility of implementing the new standards, FSA, and how we compared in that direction. Omitting the 2 years creates a totally different analysis and narrative with the 3-year versus the 5-year. And on top of that, we had a new superintendent that joined us to take us in the direction of implementing the standards. And we had a change in our assistant superintendent of curriculum during that time period, which none of this would be captured in the 3-year period. So when I look at data, and I always do in the 5-year, it has a totally different layout and analysis than the 3-year has. And everything that I've seen produced by the district has been 3 years. I haven't seen any evaluation or analysis of 5-year in anything that I've seen. So
I'm going to underline that concern because if you look at the scores in some areas too, they're very, they jump around a lot if you do a simple chart. And I think that if we're going to look at trends, 5 data points is better than 3. I don't know what the argument would be with 3. What you simply do with a trend line is you note when you see when something changes, say when we change from FSA to BEST or whatever it's going to be called, then you simply document when that was done as on any timeline. But 3 data points essentially to track a trend, I am very much opposed to too. I think we should do the 5. Now, I'm not saying we need to do that for maybe graduation or everything, but for most of the other things that we're looking at, most of the other data.
I absolutely agree. And I think some of the conversations as you guys are talking, I think it goes back to balancing the needs. You guys are very data minded and you would want and need that 5, 6, 7 years. But then some members of the community also, it was just too much. And so I think, and again, my memory's failing me, but I thought that kind of the consensus that we did was to say 3 years on the plan. Now, that doesn't mean we're not looking at outside of 3 years. Ms. Wall, you've requested through public records a lot of historical data, and we were able to pull and put that data in that format. So I think we are, to some extent, looking at it, but I agree. And keep in mind, with this particular data, we're talking about different students year over year.
Okay, I think one of the things that we have not cleared up is that it's too much for the public. And I thought we had talked at one time about sort of a drill down, that the public, and I mean,
yes,
we haven't agreed what goes in the African American Achievement Plan. Does that vary by audience? I mean, an African American Achievement Plan would be based on a very detailed base that gives you drill down data to the school, to the teacher if you needed it. But then it rolls up to something else. And so we seem to not be clear or on the same page about what is a part of the plan and what the public needs to see or what parents want to see. We've not
I will say, I
clarified.
think, Dr. Ware, you'll appreciate maybe the conversation after we go through the alignment. I think that point is definitely a good point and a valid point. And I think that when you see kind of maybe a proposal, I think you'll see us moving kind of in that direction. Also,
Okay.
I understand we have some applications that school-based personnel. Well, anyway, I think in our next conversation, I think you'll see that we're trying to move us in that direction. And what I would implore you to do is that if we still fall a little short of that, keep asking so that we keep moving in that direction.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so let's look at the alignment of the African American Achievement Plan, strategic plan. If, for those of you that are looking really at the numbers, understand that these numbers may have changed slightly from the draft strategic plan that we gave to the board at the, I think it was June 9th board meeting, or I'm sorry, the superintendent's workshop that day. We got solicited the board's advice, edits, thoughts on the strategic plan, and at that point we had data, but as we worked and as we took in the advice of those board members, we have tweaked the strategic plan that is at this point tentatively going through the July board meeting. We do also, along with the strategic plan, have a data booklet that provides all the backup data for it. So, but what we did is kind of looked at the overall goals and tried to show some, they're not going to be exactly the same, and there are some differences, but we want to kind of highlight these so that we know as we are crafting the next year's African American Achievement Plan, we can see how it is in line with the strategic plan. So just to kind of show what these slides are, and I think there's 5 of these slides. This first one is the achievement gap, ELA and math, and up, if there's a, is there a laser button? I don't want to press it. Green one? All right. There we go. So this box here shows the overall African American achievement goal, and then over here is the strategic plan's goal. And then over here below it are the actual targets for next year, and the strategic plan will have a 2025 target. And you'll see here, like the overall strategic plan goal is so that we're in the top 10 in terms of closing the achievement gap. So right now we're 45th out of 67 school districts in the achievement gap between white and black students when it comes to ELA. We're 43rd out of 67 districts when it comes to math. And so next year our target is 38 and 36, so that at 2025, the end of our strategic plan, if you will, shouldn't say the end, but the current plan is so that we're in the top 10. And then over on the right is just a snippet from the previous African American Achievement Plan that provided that baseline data for us.
Yeah.
You had a question, Dr. Warrior?
Yes, I find this sort of curious. This is to increase the state, to increase the district's ranking is one thing, but I thought it also is, and maybe I'm jumping ahead of you, it's also to close the achievement gap in Indian River County. And those are 2 different things. Are both of those considered here? Or am I mistaken? Are we not any longer trying to eliminate the achievement gap in Indian River County per se?
No, the ultimate goal absolutely is 100% achievement for every single student, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, whatever it is that you want to describe. We want 100% of our students to be proficient, level 3, level 4, level 5, and we're not going to rest until that happens. The way that the strategic plan is monitoring is that overall district, and we're trying, the metric for that is to look at the ranking across the state to ensure that not only are we closing the achievement gap, but we're closing at a much faster rate than the rest of the state is. But I think absolutely, I think the goal, the ultimate goal is for all students. Go ahead.
But then to list it as the state ranking, you close the ranking. That's not the same as closing the achievement gap per se. I mean, it sort of vaguely is. But we could rank 45 and have a gap of, I have concern about the way we're doing it, the 3 through 10 lumped together anyway, but maybe this is an issue that relates back to whom is this document, who's the audience?
Right. Dr. Ward, this is Richard Meyer, the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction. I follow your logic, and we talked about that. We talked about just having it be the goal to close the achievement gap by 10%, right? Pick a number, we're going to close it by a certain percentage. But would the community understand that? Would they understand where the achievement gap started and what a X percent decrease in the achievement gap, what does that really mean? The other challenges that we took into consideration were that we know the state's going to change the assessments on us again. And so, as previously discussed, like even if we decrease the achievement gap by half, if every other district is doing a better job by decreasing their achievement gap, then we're still not doing best by kids in this district. What we want to create here in the school district of Indian River County is where every African American student knows that they go to the school district that is serving them better than almost everybody else, right? In the top 10, we'll get to number 1, but better than any other in the state, and that's to have the smallest gaps. But the only way to have the smallest gaps is to reduce and eliminate the gaps. So I'm following your logic. We just, in order to measure it with uncertain changes in the assessments, which will throw off the actual achievement gaps themselves, and in order to communicate the goal more clearly to the public as general, like we're talking about how much is too much, I think that people understand rankings. I think that people understand, when your football team is ranked number 1 or in the top 25 or in the top 10, and you see that we're down in the 40s and 50s, and that's just not acceptable. For me to tell a community member in Publix, we closed the achievement gap by 3% this year. If they didn't understand the frame of reference, they don't really know what that means. But if we say we move from number 45 to number 25, excuse me, in 1 year, I think that could be impactful. So we will, of course, set the goals. My office, we spoke earlier about how we get there, and the goals that my office will set for next year are clearly delineated in reducing the achievement gap by a specific percent. So the district does have goals to reduce this at the office level, because we anticipate by reducing that by a specific percent, it is going to, on the other end, increase that ranking. So it's a both and. It's not an either or. It's a both and. But it's just how it's communicated.
Okay, I'm not even referring to the 10%. I agree with you. That's sort of an out of context thing to give to the public. But the state ranking does not address what we talk about in our DSEG order. Our DSEG order says eliminating the achievement gap, and that applies to Indian River County. Now, we could move up in the state ranking because the state of Florida's rankings are, I don't know what it is for the number 1 person, but I wonder how much their, achievement gap is closed. So I'm saying those are kind of 2 different things for me.
They are. I don't disagree. I mean, the getting to a place where it's a 0 gap would be a pretty special thing, right? But that's not where anybody is right now. I think that what we recognize is that we really aren't where anyone should be, which is down at the bottom of the list. And so we have to progress in 5 years to that point where we aren't, ranked at the bottom, where we are at the top. And I think that continues to give us that power to do another 5-year strategic plan after that to keep pushing forward. These are
right.
Very challenging situations that we have to just be committed to for a lifetime. So.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But okay, I don't know how we're going to track that or keep it clear or meet all the needs, and maybe it's not through one document. The other thing that I'd say, just talking specifically about what we have in equity, culture, and climate, the box there, the blue box, Dr. McMahon, is baseline 2019-2020 45. well, we know that's not real. That's 2018, 2019 move forward. Why are we doing that? I mean, why are we using that number and we're not using the 2018 or the 2018, 2019 data? Because this is
So just to clarify, Dr. Warrior, and I'm going to show the PowerPoint real quick. So are you talking about the blue box on the bottom right or the blue box on the bottom left?
on the bottom left where you have key performance indicators.
Yeah, so, and again, I apologize. The PowerPoint is only so much it can fit onto a slide. So below the blue, I do talk about the strategic plan does have a note. I just kind of copied it here. 1920, we didn't have any state assessments, so that it was impossible to rank us amongst all the 67 districts.
Right.
There was no FSA data. So the 1819 data was used in its place. In the absence of any more recent rankings.
Yeah, I don't think this is a good idea for historical purposes. I mean, you can put the little, you've got this big box up there, and then you've got the little print. To me, if the baseline year is not 2019, 2020, it should be 2018, 2019, at best.
It is. So I think the idea is that this is the strategic plan starting in 2020, 2021. So this is what we're proposing in the strategic plan this summer, so that this fall when we start 2021, and so the baseline condition is the latest data that we have. And I know it says up here baseline 1920, but that's actually 1819's data. It is the latest data that we have.
Okay, and I understand that. So why not put that there?
Yeah, and I apologize. I probably need to change this slide to show that. I did have it underneath. The thing is with the strategic plan, some data we do have from 1920. And so with the kind of the COVID is just this awkward, wonky thing, I would imagine at the end of the 2021 school year, we're going to put out, kind of some updates. We're going to relook at our strategic plan based on where we were with that. And then obviously the data would be a little bit more clear that everything comes from 2021 or 1920 or 1819.
Right, and to go back to the argument for 5 years makes even more sense with this wonky year in here, because I think we're going to see, at least for a couple of 3 years, real strange things that happen with our data.
I agree. All right. So then the next slide details the advanced coursework goals, specifically in the African American Achievement Goal, looking at the equity profile issued by DOE, which tracks our minority enrollments in AP IB classes, with dual enrollment classes, and then they call it level 3, which is another word for honors courses. The reason why they use level 3 is sometimes in those courses they don't actually have the word honors in it. So like pre-calculus, if you just take a general pre-calculus, that is a level 3 course, even though there's also an honors pre-calculus. With the strategic plan, we're looking at that district grade, specifically the two components of middle school acceleration and high school accelerated performance. So in this case, in the box of the goal, I just captured that high school accelerated, but it does also capture the middle school. And again, you've got the baseline condition. I will tell you again, to Dr. Warrior's point, it does say 1920. That is coming from the 1819 district's grade. So we rank 56 out of 67 in middle school acceleration. And there's a lot of ins and outs to it, but basically what the middle school acceleration does is it looks at how kids who theoretically should be in a high school class in middle school, how many of them do? And how many of them are successful? What percentage are successful? Oversimplifying it, so if you have more questions, please ask on that. The high school accelerated performance, it takes a look at your graduating class and says, of this graduating class, what percentage of them took and passed an AP exam? That's a 3 or higher. Took and passed an IB exam, 4 or higher. Took a dual enrollment class and earned a C or better, or took an industry certification and passed it. So what percentage of our graduating class actually has some kind of accelerated coursework, successful accelerated coursework? Questions on that? He's coming. He was napping. Actually, he had just sat down when you were
I know, right? I'm sorry, Chris. Going back to what Dr. Warrior said on the last previous slide, I think if we're going to use 2018-19 there, we probably need to do it here to stay consistent. That's all I
Yeah,
wanna
and
say.
it's a lot clearer on the strategic plan. It's just trying
Trying to move it from one place. I get it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The next one is specific to hiring and retention of African American teachers. And so the overall African American achievement goal is to increase the number of African American teachers by an average of 2 percentage points each year until it meets or exceeds the enrollment percentage, which is around 17% of our student population. And then the overall strategic plan goal is, again, to increase it by 2 percentage points until it meets the enrollment. So these two are exactly in line. And you can see down here both the certified instructors of African American percentage, but then we also are looking at the retention of those effective, highly effective instructional staff members as well. No, I think it's overall. Yeah. Yes. And then also in the African American achievement, there is action steps and goals about the attrition rate. So we're trying to retain, and that is disaggregated by race, ethnicity. Any other questions? We have ESE, the overall AAA goal to reduce specific learning disability eligibility by 0.25 risk ratio points. That comes from the African American achievement. And then the overall strategic plan goal, it does relate to the least restrictive environment. They seem to be a little disconnected, but SLD identification does lead to some cases, not all, some pull-out services which would reduce the overall LRE. And so in a way, if we can reduce the disproportionate identification of African American students with SLD, then we're going to increase our overall LRE as those students are mainstreamed in a gen ed setting. And this is not about, by the way, this is not about just reducing services, it's targeting an appropriate intervention to the student's needs. So. Yes. So you'll see a risk ratio that we have of SLD identification or IND. So that risk ratio is specific to the race ethnicity of the students. But the overall LRE is what percentage of our students are at 80% or above. Now, we have access to that in Focus. We have access to the LRE, so we can pull that data apart, and we do in the African American. Sorry.
We had identified in the ESE department this year that there are some fields that need to be tweaked in there for us to more accurately identify and monitor LRE for all students. Because of the way related services were put in, the way that the other ESE services were put in, it's a very challenging task. So I don't know, Martina, if there was any because of COVID in that area, but that's an area that we've got to kind of be able to track a little bit better.
As Dr. Jacobs says, that is an area I met with Mr. McDonald a couple of weeks ago, and I've already spoken to the new director of ESE, and we're going to meet with Mr. McDonald and put some parameters in place to monitor that, because that has not been monitored with fidelity. So we're going to make sure in focus that we have those data points that are needed, along with the African American achievement that aligns with that, as well as the strategic plan, so we don't get to come the end of the quarter and we say, well, we were not monitoring, or we don't have the data to support that. So we're going to look at what's required in here, as well as any other data points required for the state, so we have that data readily available. And we know there's not just that in student services as well. There are some monitoring discrepancies that in that area as well. So we're going to be meeting with him to put those parameters in place this summer.
A general question about the overall goal to reduce SLLD for African American students. Is this just an easier way to do it until it meets a risk ratio at or near one, than to say what's needed? I mean,
I think so the question is the risk ratio, where the goal is to reduce it to 1.0. Is that the best way to measure it, or should it be something of just, do they need it? So the risk ratio is just saying, like, if every single kid in our district was determined to be SLD, then we'd have a risk ratio of 1.0. But we don't want every kid in the district labeled as SLD, because that's not what it is. So to Dr. Warrior's point, is the risk ratio kind of meeting, is it also reducing the overall SLD eligibility? Yeah, and Dr. Warrior, I don't know if you heard Dr. Jacobs or not, but to your point, yes, we do need to reduce the overall eligibility. And I think Martina Papalardo has a comment. Do you have?
I think it's important to recognize that the SLD numbers that we're at right now is a response to the need that we have prior to referral in the pre-referral process. So I think where this number is a reactive measure, in a sense, if we're looking at it from the perspective of the African American Achievement Plan, I still think it's a relevant measure because we need to make sure that we have our checks and balances in place. However, this data point is really not going to be relevant unless we measure the pre-referral and all of the culturally responsive instructional strategies, which is another facet of the African American Achievement Plan.
I also remember when we first were sanctioned by the state due to our disproportionate suspensions, that first year, what we did is we put in a whole bunch of stuff and our risk ratio didn't go anywhere. But what we found is what we did was we addressed the overall idea of we're just suspending the heck out of kids. And so we reduced suspensions across the board. We just didn't reduce the disproportionality of that suspension. And so I think by having the risk ratio as our target, we're not just trying to reduce the overall eligibility. We're specifically trying to do that, but also the disproportionality of that identification. At 1.95, we're saying that we're identifying black students twice as often as white students, right? And race ethnicity has nothing to do with SLD. Shouldn't, yeah, it shouldn't. The data shows it does, but it shouldn't, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another comment, Dr. Warrior?
No.
Okay. All right, so the last one, and just for sake of time, this is the discipline. Overall AAAP goal to decrease the percentage of disciplinary referrals, resulting classroom removals until that percentage meets or is less than the percentage enrollment of the overall African American student population. Then the strategic plan goal is to decrease the number of students assigned out of school suspension by 50%. And that is in the first year. And then obviously the disparities in class removals by 1.5 risk ratio points. Any questions, concerns? The 1461 is all. Yeah, so the strategic plan is looking at all suspensions of classroom meals, and we're going to reduce that by half in that first year.
So then my next question would be this. I understand that the strategic plan says all, but for the African American achievement piece, the hope and the goal is to look at where our African American students are compared to the whites. So is there an option or a possibility to pull those numbers out?
Yeah,
Specifically,
absolutely.
okay.
And we will continue to deal with the African American. So imagine this. Imagine we meet this goal.
Right.
That next year, at the end of 2021, man, we've only have 731 classroom removals. We met our goal.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going to figure out is if 700 of them are black students, say, man, we didn't meet our goal.
Okay.
We met the strategic plan goal, but we failed miserably in doing what we're supposed to do.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
So that's why, and I think that's also, you have, and this might kind of explain some of this disparities, the strategic plan goal, it is that
Overall encompassing.
80,000 foot view, right?
Right.
Overall, in our district, we want to eliminate classroom removals. Kids don't understand that what we're trying to do is say your behavior is not here. Kids, what research shows, kids interpret a class removal as you don't want me here.
In your
And
classroom.
when we're doing that to kindergartners or first graders and second graders, we're setting those kids up for failure later on because from the get-go, they don't want me here, right?
Right.
And so overall, we're trying to reduce it altogether. The African American Achievement Plan comes in specifically saying that even though this is your overall goal, we've got to do more work when it comes to how we're treating and how we're interacting with our black students.
Correct.
And so you're absolutely right. That 731 is going to be broken out into
Okay.
the race ethnicity.
Because that's what the community is
Yes.
going to want to see.
Yes, yeah,
I see that,
yeah,
but, right, and I understand that that's the risk ratio piece of that,
yeah.
but I'm talking about the pure numbers.
And part
Because
of that
that's what
risk
people are
yeah.
going to see. They're going to want to see the pure numbers.
Yes. And so when we show the risk ratio, we generally show kind of like, and I don't want to go all the way back, but that first slide of the discipline,
Right.
you can see the numbers right above it. And then if I can just maybe underneath it show you the formula, how the risk ratio, you'll see it's suspensions divided by enrollment, suspensions divided by enrollment, divide those two.
Right, and I think that would be very helpful with people that are looking at it from a layman's perspective.
Absolutely. I agree.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. And that's the balance. Risk ratio, man, it is a powerful measure because it truly does capture, but on the other hand, it's kind of difficult to understand. So, all
Very
right.
true.
I know, yep. Okay. All right, so we want to move into that third piece, and that is to show you what we're proposing. But again, I want you to understand this is not, we're not imposing, we're proposing. We're not saying this is what it is. Based on the feedback we've gotten both anecdotally as well as when we solicit specific feedback for it, we've got a variety, and I'll be honest with you, sometimes competing advice, right? And it's almost like no matter what you do, it's not going to meet the needs of all people. So what we're trying to do is this iterative process. We had what we had in the African American Achievement Plan, the progress report. We know it was massive. We know it was very difficult to understand. Unfortunately, what happened is when it started, it was actually quite condensed. No, we want to put the barriers in, we want to put the action steps, we want to put this, and we want to put that. We want not just percentage, we want the numbers. And then just over time, it kind of got into this behemoth of a progress report. So some of the feedback, the amount of detail provided in the plan is overwhelming. It's just too much. Even when I look at it, I kind of get to this shudder. But then also on the flip side, it's not enough to really do problem solving that we need to do. It should be clearly focused on identified areas of priority. Some of the data elements that we're monitoring aren't exactly what the overall goal is, but we know that those things contribute to it. They need to be understood by community stakeholders. Streamlined data report aligned with specific strategies. It's going to more easily translate to action, and that's the key, is that if the data doesn't lead to action, the data is worthless. And then ongoing updates related to progress monitoring supports that data transparency. So, trying to think in light of time. So we do a Foursquare activity. What the Foursquare is, it's a variety of different names for it. It's been called SWOT. Basically, it's understanding what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like changed, and what questions do you have, okay? And so you can do this on the PowerPoint, you just on a scratch piece of paper, but what it does is it also kind of makes sure that we're taking a holistic view and that we're not just spending all this time tearing it apart, because there are some things that are good in this progress report, and we want to be able to capture those things. So I want to give you just a few minutes, let's say 5 minutes, just to go through this 4-square activity, your personal thoughts. Put it on paper. Write down what is it about that progress report, that African American Achievement Progress Report, that you like. What is it? What are the strengths of it? And then on the other side of it, where does it not meet the mark? What are the weaknesses? What are the things that it causes disruptions in your understanding of the data? The triangle on the bottom right, that's the Greek letter delta. Science, math, we use that for change. So what would you like to change in this progress report? And then the question mark would just be, I've always wondered why this or why that, or I wonder why we don't have this particular thing. So if you'll take 5 minutes and just sketch out things, write them down, write down phrases. You're not going to turn them in, we're not going to collect it, we're going to just have a conversation afterwards to kind of wrap our minds around things that we like and don't like and would like to change. So I'll give you 5 minutes and I'll stop talking.
Oh, okay, Dr. McMahon, I wanted to talk to you. You're saying now the African American Progress Report. To me, that's different than the African American Progress Plan. What are we talking about?
We are talking right now about how the data is distributed, how the data is put out there, how we can meet kind of the similar conversations we've had all morning about, whether it's 3 years or 5 years of a baseline, whether we show all level 1s through 5 and not just a 3 and above. What our goal is that as much as possible to streamline the data reporting so that since we have this African American Achievement Plan, can we craft the progress report, the data reporting mechanism, can we craft it in a way that meets multiple needs? So as the Equity Committee, I know that the Equity Committee has their plan, they request specific data, but could we craft an overall monthly progress report that gives 80%, 90%, 99% of the data that you would need? We recognize that there are going to be some things that you want to tease out of it. There's going to be requests of the Equity Committee. We'd really like to look at the data this way or that way. But could we at least back up and say our current progress report, maybe it's 30% right now meeting the needs. Can we up that? And so first what we want to do is just get some feedback, specific feedback about what you like, don't like, want to change. I want to then show you kind of a proposal based on some of the things that you guys have been sharing with us so that we can see maybe does this move us in the right direction, and then how can we then further tweak it? time, we're going to limit kind of this conversation to 10 minutes. We're just going to talk about things we like about it. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I do want to show you, because again, we've been hearing a lot of the feedback, so it's not like, I think largely the feedback you guys are going to have is stuff you guys have already communicated to us. And so what I really want to do is spend the bulk of the time kind of looking at the sample of what we have interpreted the feedback and see if we can meet the needs of that and then get some specific feedback on that. But we do want to honor, what is it that you like about this particular plan? What is it that you don't like about this progress report? What is it you would like to change? And we'll just kind of popcorn these out. I know there's 2 microphones, right, Chris? Or is there, if you want me to grab one, I can. Anyone want to start us off?
So I think it's good information here, but I want to go back to what Mrs. Wall said earlier on when we talk about trend setting instead of having the 3 years, the 5. I think that would satisfy a lot of curiosity so that they can look over a 5-year span, because in research, the 5 years is what we look at. And I also think, I know what this means, and probably everybody in here now, because we've been talking about it so much, but when you look up at the top of your columns and you have the CT3+, and I know that's the count of students at a level 3 or above, but maybe somewhere in here we can write that so that people will understand that, and then the total count. That way there's no question as to about what the numbers represent.
So as a follow-up, 2 things. One is just overall, so you guys know, Libby in the back has taken notes, so I don't want you to think I'm, oh yeah, sure, we'll do that, and then not ever writing it down. So just want to make sure that's clear. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So in the Excel spreadsheet, that little red thing signifies as a note, and if you hovered over it, it would pull up this note that would explain that. I'm wondering, based on the feedback, we probably missed the mark in putting it there.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be a good thing to do, and then just let people know that, if you hover there, here's what you can find. The
Okay, so-
definitions, the terminology.
I guess what I'm saying is we did have that. So do you think that that's a good place for it, and we just need to do a better job of communicating that it's there?
Yes.
Okay.
I do, but but people can't use what they don't know, so thank you.
Good point. Any other comments? Ms. Hofer?
So one of the things when we were having the conversation about the Lexile, I was going to say, did the people understand that an average Lexile growth, how does that equate to a grade level? How does that equate to a year's growth? Because if I didn't know anything about it, that's what I want to know. That 80 or that 70 actually equates to a year and a half of growth. And wow, look where we've taken the kids. So just, it is all
Context.
Yes.
Context.
Even iReady, AR, all those measures, those are all programs that are happening in the schools, but to the outside world, what's the big picture? And can I easily see, okay, we are making strides in these areas. So
Absolutely.
No, don't give back.
Any other comments? Mr. Meyer? There you go.
I just think, we work in this a lot as educators, so I can pretty much pick up any data sheet and know what we're talking about. But I know that the common person probably can't. So having some narrative explanation maybe to what each sheet is meant to show. I know we have to be careful with that because we don't want to bias anyone's interpretation. So you just sort of let them get it and make their own interpretation. But as we were discussing earlier, some of these charts, what are we supposed to get from this, right? What is this really showing? So a brief explanation on the sheets when they're printed to help the public understand what they're looking at, I think would be helpful. And then, I get it that that's there on the online version, but if there's a key or something that we can put on the printed versions or a glossary or something like that, I think it would be helpful for the community to be able to interpret what's going on.
I agree. I think that's a great point, because here's the thing, guys, is that in the past, it was not meant to be transparent, right? And so now we are, and then now these are the speed bumps that we're going across. So I think that that's good, and I appreciate the feedback.
Okay, to piggyback on what I think that was Mr. Meyer said, I agree. There's not enough narrative. These tables end up basically giving what almost seems like not many steps up above raw data. And what I think we haven't worked out, and I'm just going to throw this out, and maybe there'll be a place to discuss this today or not. What we haven't worked out is the difference between what the Equity Committee needs for monitoring and compliance of the desegregation order, what is a report that we send to the community, what is a database that allows those of us who are looking at data to drill down. And it seems like we're trying to mass all that into one behemoth, like you said, document that becomes very, very difficult, because I think in terms of what Dr. Meyer said was that narrative, people are going to read narrative and maybe a couple of simple charts and graphs, which are very powerful if you graphed or charted any of this data. And you know, and then there's another level here. And I'm just concerned, my overall feedback, if I'm concerned, is we're trying to do too many things with a single artifact of measurement document.
Point well taken, Dr. Warrior. I agree.
So I was just going to make a comment that I was going to say that the barriers are listed over here, but then I went ahead and saw where you changed that and added the barriers. So I wanted to say that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Piggybacking on Dr. Long said earlier, we often get in the point of speaking from our comfort zone. And Dr. Warrior also said it. It's an old thing that we did in football called KISS. Keep it simple, sweetie.
I don't think that's what you said on the football field.
We're talking to lay people. Yes. Just for instance, based on these charts, 2.5 times as many African Americans are disciplined as to whites. The average person can feel and touch that.
Yes.
But when you give me graphs and all of this, and I got to go vertical or horizontal, and so I would just say let's do it from the perspective of just keeping it simple.
That's a great point. Thank you. And so I think that's really where Dr. Warrior's point is because, like you said, we want to keep it simple, but then we also want to show all this detail so we can really kind of tear into it. And so to Dr. Warrior's point, maybe it doesn't belong in one report. Or maybe in what I show you, maybe we can kind of take what we have and kind of pull out some of those big picture, kind of keeping it simple metrics, but also kind of, because the one thing we don't want to be is we don't want to not be transparent. So it's not like we want to, hey, just 2.5 times. Well, what about 3rd grade versus 8th grade? What about this school versus that school? And all these follow-up questions are valid questions, and it's really taking an understanding. It's not enough just to say 2.5 times. You're right, that kind of, that's here, but then it almost begs more questions. So we need some of that so that we're transparent. We're not just making up numbers, right? Any other kind of burning issues, questions? I don't want to cut us off, but I also want to be mindful of the time and lunch. I'm just kidding. Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall, did you have any other?
No.
No, thank you.
All right, so again, proposed, not imposed. This is just something that we wanted to kind of showcase that we hear, you know, I don't want to say complaints. We hear the strengths, we hear the weaknesses of it, and so now's the time to kind of reformat. So I will say, this is kind of, don't look at the numbers, by the way. I may have made up some of the numbers in making this, okay? So like, I think I have, did I use 1819? So I'll just say blanketly, the numbers here may not represent actual data, okay? So one thing I would propose, it drove me nuts going into that one Excel file if I just wanted to look at discipline. early on, I had the tab of discipline, but in order to get the breakout, even though I had hyperlinks, it was like way the heck over here under like 80 tabs. And it was hard to navigate back and forth. And then even on that first page of academic success, you had everything from state data to school recognition to gifted eligibility to, I mean, it was a lot of stuff. So what I would propose is that we have almost like a separate file for each metric. So what you're holding or seeing up here is strictly ELA achievement. Then you would have another file, if you will, of math achievement, and another one of science achievement, and another of social studies achievement. So that if you're just looking at, I want to look at math and I want to really dig into it, you only have to go to that one file. Now, I love the point of just this kind of higher level. And so maybe what kind of just thinking in terms of the feedback you're giving me now is, in addition to having the ELA and the math and the science, we have kind of like a one-page memo that just gives a summary of this is where we're at now. And it has kind of some overall pictures, not a bunch of detail, just an overall. And then, wow, our math isn't doing too well. I want to know why. So then we can go over to the math file, do all the things. So what you're seeing here is a proposed page 1 of 3 pages. And it's a standardized format of what I'm proposing. So, and again, has 3-year baseline. I hear already the comment, maybe we could do 5-year. Maybe we just put 3-year here and we provide 5 years kind of on the backup. But what I would like to do is kind of, this is the overall, provides a little bit more depth, shows you the baseline, shows you the barriers, shows you the progress monitoring measures. But then the next tab, if you will, in this file would disaggregate the progress measures by school and by ethnicity. And then the third tab would be by grade level and by ethnicity, so that you can start to see some of those things and some of those trends. It's not going to meet everyone's needs, and it might be that, hey, I really would like to see elementary as a whole. Well, if that case, we can start to develop those reports, but at least this format, could it meet the majority of needs, is a little bit easier to understand. We've got the district total as well as the state total. I know the state numbers, that really doesn't provide us context, but the percentage does, and I want to at least show you where those came from. And then I also have the gaps, which is meeting the needs of the strategic plan, all right? Thoughts? Feedback? And it's just an Excel spreadsheet. It's not like it's my, artwork. So I have no, you're not going to upset my feelings. Ms. Walker?
Frame a possibility to have like a Q&A once a month, like when the data comes out, so people can jump in and say, well, what does that mean? And what do you think about that? And you could, or whomever, could provide some assistance in analyzing the data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic idea. And that's what we want. We want to not just, it'd be great if, I think that's a fantastic point. I don't mean to belabor it. Right behind you, Chris.
I got it. You hit the nail on the head with the snapshot followed by more definitive, breaking it down, math, science, because if I'm a parent that's looking to get my child into the STEM program, I wouldn't be worried about everything, but I would look at my math.
Absolutely.
So, snapshot, then a more definitive backup to it. Okay. And I think you hit it on the head.
I will say just what we envision is kind of like, imagine a website and it kind of, everything's organized and it has those files there as well. That was kind of, it's not just going to be this laundry list of 80 files. We're going to graphically show it so that here's the academic measures. You click here and it comes up to another page. Here are the overall. So try to organize it a little bit better. Dr. Warrior, Ms. Wall, do you have any questions, comments?
Well, my comment is evidently you all collect this data and store it in some hierarchical structure. because how else will you drill down from this point up here to the schools, and how do schools develop when you go out and do the data checks? And I think when I think about EdStat, you know, I can click on, I mean, where's the data? I'm looking for why don't we just create a database? And then we can pull all kinds of reports from that. And I'm assuming that you already have that database since you go out and do these data checks with your school.
Yes, we do, and they are tied specifically to very strict security rules because of FERPA. And so we do. We have, Focus has some reports. We also utilize for our automated data management system, our ADMS system, Unify. And within Unify, we have a lot of ability to tease out data, but that is tied directly to their individual role in the district. So if I'm a principal of Beachland, I can't necessarily see student data from Citrus or from another school because of FERPA. We also have, we're starting, got several dashboards through a service called Power BI, which is a Microsoft product. It also provides real-time abilities to disaggregate and to tear apart those data. And you know, the risk is we can't make those public facing because of FERPA. We can't have it to where if you filter down and all of a sudden you realize, hey, there's one, and I'm kind of making this up as we talk, one white ESE third grader at Pelican Island. Well, if I can filter down to white Pelican Island third grade, and then now I have academic measures, I know what that kid scored, right? And so because of FERPA, we have to be careful of how we publicly face some of our data. That's why we have all those less than 10s. And I know it's, you and I have talked about it, Dr. Ware. I know that it's not the best, but it is a direction that DOE has provided us, that if there is a cell count of less than 10, we mask it, we hide it, so as not to reveal the identity or the any kind of attribute to that child. So
right. But EdStat goes down a number of levels, and it masks that, and we don't have to see that level. And I don't know why a principal of any school couldn't see the data on any other school in the district. We're a district.
Yes, they can on aggregate, but they cannot see individual students. So we do provide a lot of reports where we do show how their performance, their school is performing, how their grade level is performing versus another, you know, overall district grade level or individual schools. And so within Unify, there are some things that they can aggregate there. Within Power BI, there are some things they can pull across the district, but we cannot provide each principal and each AP and the public with access to every single child's data.
Okay, okay, that's all fine, but still, it's why can't we create some type of data base? Because I mean, as you know, I do a different level of analysis, as does Mrs. Hall, and we work on a lot of these together. And some of the things that you're going to see that I'm assuming the curriculum and instruction will be interested in when you lay this data out, you must have it in some place. Say, we've looked at 8th grade algebra scores. We see that there are only 29 Black, you know, 8th grade students taking algebra. Yet we know that that cuts out then all the STEM, you know, directions, and that cuts out, and they need that to graduate. And if you track back to the schools, some of the schools we've looked at, you see a very strange trend line developing around 5th grade. And so something is happening around 5th grade. So I'm saying there are all kinds of implications about pulling this data together that I know the general public doesn't want to see. But I'm saying, can we not create something that allows you not to be taking up, me taking up your time, and Mrs. Wall, taking up your time asking for public records requests and doing that, and then you're over here separately creating something else, because I feel like I don't really have much to add to this discussion today if all we are talking about is what kind of sheet can we put out, you know, to parents to understand.
I agree.
That's a different level.
I think you bring up a great point, Dr. Ware, and unfortunately we can't create EdStats for Indian River. The cost of creating that program is just phenomenal. We do have Unify, and we have Power BI. I would love to sit down with you, and I can show you all the things that those two platforms can do. It is like EdStats in that it really depends on the filtering and stuff. The difference is that those two platforms are internally tied to the user. We do not have those public facing, so a member of the public can't log into that system. It's just too cost prohibitive. But I'd be more than happy to, and I offered that before COVID, and maybe we need to, wait, or maybe we can just do something virtually. I have no problem sitting down and kind of sharing with you, with Ms. Wall, with whoever. These are the platforms that our principals use, because I'll be honest, the access and the tools that they have are far more, gives them far more ability to understand the root cause and treatments than a static report is or does.
Right, because we're doing, sort of two different, and beyond that is, there's the equity committee and then there's the NAACP. And most of my analysis is done for the NAACP and looking, in addition to what you all are doing. And so we are taking a much deeper dive into the data than the equity committee is. So I'm going to try to be real quiet during the rest of this discussion today, because I think we're talking about kind of
you can still lend your expertise in this particular. I understand what you mean. I think that there is kind of two needs here. And maybe to the point earlier, there's actually three levels. One is that high level view that just gives that overall number. And then the middle level, kind of that, this.
Yes.
Along with all the backup, that's level 2. And then maybe we need to set up just a regular time, whether it's virtual or not, with you and really just kind of dig deeper into it. And we can use Power BI, we can use Unify, we can use Focus to drive and drill down. The problem or the risk, we can't do that at the equity committee, because as you're drilling down and disaggregating, we can't reveal in a public forum individual student data. And so that's the problem, is that right now those vehicles are not set up for public facing.
Right.
But in a kind of a,
Well, in terms of the work that Swall and I do, that are you not doing that in curriculum and instruction, say, for example, anyway? I mean, you must be looking at.
We are, but we're doing it through those platforms. And so when we look at it, when the public record says, I want this and this, and I've got to create that, it's not that we haven't looked at it, it's not that we haven't done it, it's just that I have not done a static report that I can hit Control P and print it. And so that's where I'm kind of creating that. But I can show you in the platforms what we're looking at, what we're designing, how we're putting this in. The reason why we're going into Power BI is that we control Power BI. We're about to push out an attendance dashboard that's just, it's 100 times better than what we have in the past. We can show attendance, student attendance by Monday through Friday. We can see, hey, the average rate on Monday is this, and it kind of builds up, and then guess what happens on Friday? It tails down. Well, maybe we need to do some initiatives on Friday attendance. But all of that stuff, it's an interactive database, because that's what problem solving is. You have a hypothesis. I need to find the data that either validates that hypothesis or rejects that hypothesis. And you might have a hypothesis that I don't have that might be different than everyone else in the room. And you need a database or ability to kind of manipulate things on the fly to validate or refute that hypothesis. And unfortunately, that's not a static report. We can't, here you go.
Okay, absolutely. We want it, probably the interactive. Will we have access to the interactive database? Is there any level of ability to do that? Because I'm not interested in PDF files either.
Unfortunately, due to FERPA, I cannot, in its current state, give you blanket access to it. You would have access to that, our principals wouldn't have access to. And it would violate FERPA. So, but I can, and the offer still stands. I had offered to you guys to meet regularly once a month, and I'll just sit at my computer. We can kind of talk about it, and you can say, I'd like to see this, and I'd like to see that. I'll pull it up real quick, and we can show you. I have no problem doing that, and the offer still stands for that.
Okay, the last thing I have to say is, too, about the data and the root cause analysis and the barriers. All those were created based on what people thought felt into it. I'm really concerned about that. I have been back, even when I was on the African American Achievement Committee. Because if we are not, and this is what I said earlier, if we're not addressing the real barriers and the real root causes, which is not just done through sort of a survey, as it sounds like this one was done in a brainstorming session, we'll never get the right interventions and we'll never have the outcomes that we'll have no precision in what we're doing.
Absolutely. And I think that root cause analysis, it was step one.
Okay.
It's the input. I mean, you could look through what Dr. Long cataloged is all of the root causes. They're all hypotheses. They're all, and sometimes they're all over the place. And the fact of the matter is that African American achievement, the achievement gap, is not a result of one root cause. Otherwise, we'd fix it and we'd be done and we wouldn't be having this conversation. It is a myriad, and so you're absolutely right. In problem solving, you want to target the big barriers that you feel that with the resources and personnel and so forth, you feel you can tackle that resource. And I think that's a valuable point.
Because if we even did a data review, I haven't even seen anybody do, a literature review. I mean, I haven't even seen a detailed literature review on any subject if I'm going to bring you my hypothesis, just as when we write our thesis and our dissertations, you bring in a lit review.
I have one on early warning systems published. Does that help?
Okay. All right, I'm finished.
I don't mean to jest. Yes. And I think that's what we're constantly striving for. We're not an academic research institution. We are, but it is a valid point. We don't want to just act without understanding it. So we do want to, sometimes we do rely on outside research to drive where we're going.
Oh, okay, because you are educators and you are supposed to do best practices.
Yes.
And how else do you find best practices without some sort of review of the data in the area that you're in? Okay.
I agree.
So with that, Dr. Warrior and Ms. Wall and whomever, the 3 levels that Dr. McMahon spoke about was having that more intensive conversation regarding the data platforms that we have, because we cannot release certain data to the public because of FERPA. So we would be willing to do that and schedule that. We can start scheduling that as of July, and we have them scheduled out for the rest once a month. Or if you want more than once a month, we can do that. And, we can do it in Teams if we want to do it in Teams, or you can do it in person, however, whatever platform. But that's just one measure. We want to be able to meet the many, needs of our community. We want to put it in, layman's terms for our parents that are, we've heard it over and over, that they can read it, and then we want to make it efficient, that we can look at it in a snapshot and be able to have conversations about it. For our principals as well as for all of our stakeholders. So we really want you guys to take us up on that offer, because we really want to meet the needs of all of our customers. So we'll circle back around. This is not the end of the feedback for the format. We're going to have that again in the 5:30 to 8 o'clock session as well. Dr. McMahon is going to bring back also the barriers section, because we had some technical difficulties this morning, so it took us, a few minutes to get that underway. So we'll bring this back up towards the end as well. So we do want feedback on the barriers. That was one of the part of his PowerPoint that I had him skip, so we could get to the format, so he can work on that and be able to have a sample this afternoon.
All right. Well, thank you. And I realize everybody's working really hard. I'm not suggesting that, and a lot of people are interested.
So
we gotta work smarter, though.
So we do want feedback, though. That's how we get better. And you'll notice that at the 1 o'clock session, we're all going to be collaboratively learning, discussing together, so we can get feedback to make this plan better than what it is now. So
real quick, just 1 minute. Is there anything specific about this that you feel glaringly like, man, I wish it had X, or I wish it had Y, I wish it had Z?
Or think about it at lunchtime, and when we start back at 1, if you want us to look at it again, we'll be more than happy to do that.
The goal was to take some of this feedback during that lunch to 5 o'clock. I'll go back on my computer and kind of make those tweaks to re-present it at tonight's session and say, does this meet your needs? So if you do have that specific feedback, please.
Okay, this concludes our morning session. We will join back up at 1 o'clock. There is lunch. We ask that you take 2 sandwiches, no more than 2. In the multi-purpose room, you can eat in there. You can also eat in here, but they're gonna be moving, tables around. Yes, the center is fine, or the large instructional conference room.